This is Gemara and Shekalim Daf Gimel. All the learning for this month, the month of Nisan, has been sponsored by the Grun family, Lead Nishmas Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi, whose yahrzeit is coming up on Chav Zayin Nisan. The learning of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous chos Ilin Nisham. As well as today's Shir Yud Aleph Nisan is also sponsored as the chos for the Neshama of Miriam Bas Eliezer Akayin, whose yahrzeit is today. Her Neshama should have an aliyah, and the chos of the entire learning should as well be a tremendous chos for her Neshama. Well, of course, our Chaylim and Mevegel Chaim Ben Sar, some Stephen Redizel, Zarbas Knendel, Ita Baskim Bas Chay, Sayu Sol Memendel, Eliezer President, Shavlea, Shomaz Novi, Shafiq, Rashir Khana, Rafal Davani, Teriva Shmo Ben Tila, Dinim Ben Khan Rizal, Mukhay, Basmini, Rachavas, Tavi Musa, Dinino, Bashid, Mendel, Simchatavia Ben Avifail, Fasha, Svi Ben Vega, Diver, Michel, Nisipur, Nasatelia Huva, Menachem Mendel Ben Toiva, Besoy Shachali Israel, Wazachos Shidach, Vatalia Basita, and Menachem Mendel Ben Elisheva. Avol the Indian Shtarais, this is really where we left off with regard to Shtarais. Kaisvin Adar Rishon Vadar Sheni Stam. When you write a star during the first Adar, you write Adar Rishon. During the second Adar, you just write the word Adar. Whereas if you Daimer, no, Adar Rishon, when it comes to the first Adar, that's when you write it Stam. But Adar Sheni Tinya, and then you write Adar Sheni. Says the Gemara top line, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, beginning a new sugya, beginning of the continuation of the first Mishnah, or more precisely, I should say the first halacha, as we're learning that in Yerushalmi, things are broken up into halachas. Says the Gemara, Misaknen es adrachim, we fix the roads, v'esarachavos, and the streets, v'esmikvais, hamayim, and the bodies of water, v'aisin kol tzarchei rabim, and you do all the public needs, and we're going to see here why this was brought into our first Mishnah, a Mishnah that dealt primarily with machzah shekel. Why do we discuss all these different communal needs? Says the Gemara, Ilu ein tzarchei rabim. What are the tzarchei rabim? Dani dini mamonos. We judge capital cases, dani nefashis, and criminal offenses. Dini makos, upai dini erchin v'charamim v'aktishas, and we redeem the erich value as someone pledges to give his value to the Beis Hamikdash. Charamim and hektish are different types of ways of consecrating different items to the Beis Hamikdash. Umashkin is asaita, and we allow the saita to drink the waters to test if she was faithful to her husband. V'sarfin es hapara, and we burn the para aduma. V'arfin egla arufa, and we decapitate egla arufa. V'roitzin eved ivri, and we put a hole in the ear of the eved ivri if he chooses to stay with his master. Umatarin es hamaseira, and we make tar the maseira. Mafarkin es haminol, and as well we make we are Mefarkin, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page over here. Here we are. Mefarkin as minol me'al gabi amayim, which means we remove the minol, the lock, from on top of the water. Which basically what happened was they would save the water in order that there would be enough for the communal needs. So they would unlock that lock during this date. Vein machzir naisan, and they would not replace the lock. And those were all the different communal needs. Tamon Taninan, we learned over there in the Mishnah, Mashkin Beis HaShlachim, as well, they would water this field. Umetzaydin ala kvares. Now already we start to see something we spoke about in our Mishnah, that they would mark off the graves. Loi kvar tzayne me Adar, that which was not already marked off from Adar. V'tiftar shiyarid shetav shel geshamim v'shatfu. And as well, they would explain, they were tifater shiyarid shetav shel geshamim v'shatfu, if the rainwater would wash off the grave, meaning they explained that what does this mean they marked off the graves? That if there was a deluge of rain, a flood, that would mark off the different markings of the grave, they would remark them so people would know where the graves were in order to be careful and not to become tamei. That's the whole list of communal needs. And we continue, v'yaitzin aval kalayim, they would also go out. Again, let's remind yourself that which we learned in the first Mishnah, that we said that first of all what they would do is they would go out and they would remind them to remove the klayim. That's what they would do on the first of Adar. That's what they would be machrizin, mashmin on the klayim. And then on the 15th, which is what we're discussing right now, on the 15th of Adar, they would go and they would mark off the graves. As well, they would go and they would yoitzin al kalayim, which means they would inspect, which is what we're going to see right now, exactly what they would do with regard to the kalayim. Says the Gemara, loy kvar yatzu me'adar. What's going on over here? Why are they going out again? They already went out to announce about the kalayim on Rosh Chodesh Adar. Tifater, which again means they explained, which is a way of saying an answer. Sheisa hashana afela. that when the year became late, and it was not recognizable, the growths, so they would have to go out again. How do we know that they would have to go out? Rav Brachi, Rav Akiva Bar Bas Yaakov V'Shem Rav Chunya Divris Choivrin Rav Yisa Amro Le Rav Yisa. These are all different names. Amro Le Rav Yaakov Bar Acha B'Shem Rav Chunya Divris Chavrin Rav Chizkiya Rav Uziel Breid Rav Chunya Debeis Chorian B'Shem Rav Chananya Debeis Chavron V'Tamei Yekra. So after a list of all these names, then we finally find out that says the Gemara, V'Tamei Yikra, which we learn now, Kedei Shetei Atoma Kaira Lecha B'Fiyah. You have to call out. This is referring to the Mitzayra. You would say, I'm Tamei, don't come close. V'Ameres Lai Lecha Paraish, stay away. And from here we see a Makar. We see that you have to be very careful on Tama V'Tayra. As you see over here in the Tiklin Chadatin, he explains, Karlai Paraish Kalaimar Oisin Siyunin Ala Tama Leida Lahavrish. We make markings to stay away from Tama, just like by the Mitzayra you would call out. This is the makar that we know that we have to mitzayin, that we have to mark off the graves to keep people away from the tama. They would put some lime on top of the grave so people would know where they were. Rabbi Elam, and we're going to learn in a few moments exactly where they made these markings, etc. Rav Elam, Hashem Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, Va'avru Ha'ivrim Ba'aretz. And the passers-by passed by in the land, says the Gemara, V'ra etzem ha'adam, they saw a bone of a person, ubana etzlei tzion, and they built next to that bone a marking. Says the Gemara, is another makar that we know that we have to make markings to mark off for the graves. Where's this pasuk? A pasuk in Cheskel that teaches us that when they would see a piece of a bone, they would slap down some paint so everyone knows that this was an area that there was tama. Says the Gemara, etzem mechen. Where was the bone? Shemetzayin ala tzamais. Etzam mechen shemetzayin ala tzamais. Adam mechen shemetzayin ala shidra. Shidra and the Gulgalis. Meaning, if there was a bone, that's a case that would mark off that there's a bone. If there was an Adam, these are all we're darshaning up the pasuk. I'm sorry. What do the pasuk say? Etzem Adam ubane. So we're explaining that etzem means biyachin shemesayin al atzamais. Adam means that they would mark off for the shidra and the gulis, different parts of the body which impart tama. And bana, what does that mean? Mikan shemetzayin al gabe evin kavua. They would make a stone that would sit there forever and ever to know that this is an area that there was tama. So this is the second makar that we're seeing, either tami yikra or this pasuk in Yecheskel teaching us we have to be careful to mark off wherever there is tama. Says the Gemara, Im Aimer as al gabi evin telusha. But what about if they would do it on top of a detached stone? You just told me you have to do it on an attached stone, a stone that's set in the ground. What about on a detached stone? We'd be concerned that maybe you would roll and you're not going to know where it is. It's going to end up in another place, so it doesn't help us. You're going to see a stone somewhere with a marking on it and you'll think, there's tuma here. No, there's not. The stone rolled all the way from back there. So says the Gemara, you have to make the marking on a stone that's going to stay in that area. Etzloi. This is the end of the pasuk. Again, the pasuk upon Etzloi. L'makim tahara tziein. Mikan letziein. So what do we see from over here? They have to make a marking where the place is, exactly where the tuma is. Tzion, and when the pasuk Tzion, Michen Litzion, that they would have to make a mark for the marking. Umatza, says the Gemara, Evan Achas Mitsuyanes, they would make one stone as a mark, Afal Bishain Mekayimin, Cain, even though it would not stay, Amal Olel Tame, but someone who went on top of it would be Tame. Now we're going to learn exactly, precisely, where the tuma was in relation to the stone. Ani Oimer, Mace, Mitsuyan, says the Gemara, that if there's a mace, they would be underneath the stone. Then a tar. So again, if there's one stone, you have to assume the stone was placed on top of it, tachtel, and therefore the tumah is underneath it. So if you go over that stone, you become tameh. Hayushtayim, if there are two stones, then amal alein tar. Then if you go over each of the independent stones, we assume you're tar because they're two different stones. But beinayim tameh, we assume they put a stone here and a stone here because the tumah, the corpse, was in between it. So over each one you'll be tameh, tar, but in the middle you'll be tahar. But if it's plowed between the two stones, so what do we assume then? Then we assume that each one is an individual marking, and therefore beinayim tar, between them will be tar. Usvivayseim tameh, but around the stone will be tameh. So again, if you find one stone with a marking on it, a little limestone, there's a marking on it, so what do you assume? That is where the tumah is. So you go over that stone, boom, you're tummy. You find two stones, then you assume each stone independently is not right on top of the grave. Rather, the grave ran in between it, so you go over the middle, be tummy. But let's say you see two stones, and the area is plowed in between it. So that shows you clearly, if it's plowed, there was no corpse there. So then it must be two dependent graves, and each one in total will be tummy, but in the middle will be tar. Tani, we learned in the Mishnah, concluding this portion, in Mitzayin el Basar, we don't make a mark. Flesh from a corpse, because it might decompose, and therefore we're going to end up creating tumah for no reason. People are going to think they're tameh. Rav Yosta Bar Shuna Bali Kumi Rav Mana, but then you're going to end up creating tumah for no reason. Amar Leis, you responded, it's better that for that one time they get messed up than not forever. If you're going to make a marking on the basar, then forever and ever you're going to think that there's tumah there, and there really isn't. And that's the reason why you do not make a marking over the basar. We don't really have time. Let's just see one taknin chadatin over here. Vaiskaklu ba'la'olam v'sheyasu tzion yispru la'olam shadayin atamasham. Like we just explained, you're always going to think that there's tama there. V'yisru b'chinim kol kachem shavar aleim. And if you carried over karbanos, you're going to think they're taming to burn them. B'shaygeg oy b'layluk shein mitzuyan ein sarvin aleim ela mechadish shlo chaser adayim. So that's the reason why we don't make that marking. Okay, let's begin the next Mishnah. As we mentioned, it's called the halacha. Halacha base in this fabulous Masechta of Shekalim. Says the Mishnah, Amar Rav Yehuda, we're going back. We said in the Mishnah about Kalayim. They announced Rosh Chodesh Adar, get rid of your Kalayim. Tesvav Adar, they went to inspect. Is there any Kalayim left? Let's say they find someone planted a forbidden mixture. What would they do? They would uproot it, the inspectors, and throw it in front of the person. Says the Tiklin Chadatim, to embarrass him. Should be embarrassed that you have Kalayim. But then what happened? Mishrabu Aveira. People who do Aveiras proliferated. There were a lot of people who did sins. And we'll explain in the Gemara what happened. So they wouldn't throw it in front of them. Rather, they would throw it into the street. Hiskinu Shem Afkirin. And then eventually they had to make their whole field Hafkar as Kol Asadeh. So again, exactly what happened over here is, let's see in the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, says the Gemara. Tani Amar Rav Yehuda, very shine in the beginning. Now we're going to get to other details of the story. They would uproot the klai in front of the batim, in front of the owner to embarrass them. The owner was very happy. They didn't have Avera. We pointed out the Avera and they were happy. Why they're happy? Shnei Samachais, two reasons. They say, thank you so much. You're weeding my field. You're pulling out the bad guys. That's another reason. They got benefits because now they're animals and what to eat. So we're going there, inspectors, and we're pointing out you didn't have Avera, and the Baal Avera is being happy. You weeded my field. You give my animals food. So then what happened? There were a lot of people like this. So they would take out the climb, they would throw it to the street. And then what happened? And they were still happy. Why? So now they weren't feeding their animals, but they still had one simcha that you're weeding my field. So then they were mafkir the whole field. So there's a two-stage process that happened over here. Again, first they would go and they would announce about the klayim. Then they would go and inspect. And if you didn't comply, they would pick it up. They would throw it in front of you to embarrass you. They saw they were being happy. 1 year weeding my field, 2 my animal gets to eat. So they went and they threw it in the street. They saw they were still happy. So they went. They were mafkir their entire field. You're over an avera. You lose your whole field. Everyone is wondering, how does Bezdin have the power to make you lose your field? So let's see the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Minayin Shafker Bezdin Hefker. How do we know that Bezdin has this power to make your field Hefker? The Chsiv says in the Torah, V'chol asher lo yavel l'shlosheh yamim. It says in the Pasuk in Ezra that anyone who did not come for 3 days, Ezra wanted to gather Klal Yisrael who were intermarrying, and he wanted to give them Musar, and he said, if you don't come, what's going to happen? If you don't listen to the advice of the ministers and the elders, I'm going to make Hefker all your possessions. And you're going to be separated from Klal Yisrael. So we see clearly that Bezdin had a power to be mafkir all their properties. Okay, so one level is we can make your field ownerless. But how do we know we can make it ownerless to the extent that the Kehanim and Levim are going to lose out? Because we know you have to give off the appropriate tithes on every field. But if we go and we make it ownerless, now the Kehanim and Levim are going to lose out. So how do we know Bezdin even has that power? Says the Gemara, Rav Yitzchak bar Acha Shamala min Hada. He learned Ein Ma'avrin Es Hashana Loi B'Shviyas. This is the Raya. You're not allowed to make an Iber year in the 7th year, V'Loi B'Maitzai Shviyas, and not in the 8th year. But the Imiv Ruah, let's say you did it. You're not supposed to make a leap year in year 7 or year 8, adding in an extra month of Adar and a second Adar. But if you did it, Harezim Mubaris, it works. Says the Gemara. And so therefore, let's say they weren't supposed to, but they went and they added a second Adar. What happens? Loi Pater mi Maisris? Is it not Pater from Maisris? Of course it is. Who? It is Pater Maisris. Why? Because it has the status of Shemitah. It's an Adar Beis of the 7th year. So they're not supposed to make it Shemitah, but if they did, it works. So we see clearly that Bezdin has the power to make something completely ownerless, even to the point that it's Pater from Maisris. Ad Kedoin Shvius, Maisai Shvius Mai. Okay, so explain to me Shemitah, what about Maisai Shvius? Amar Avur, Rabun, Shlo, the rabbis, Isser Chadash, it's a different reason. So that we don't proliferate Isser Chadash, because not going to be any crops, and now you can have an extra month before you get to the new crop. Zira b'shem Rav Elazar Hada, he explained that Amar Ad Shelo Yeter Rebbe Lahavi Yarik Mechutz La'aretz. Before Rebbe allowed you to bring crops from outside of Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, that's when we said this thing that you're not allowed to make this leap year. Avo Misha Yeter Rebbe Lahavi Yarik Mechutz La'aretz. He Shavi he V'chol Shar Shnei Shavua. Then it's not a problem making a leap year at all, because once we're going to be able to have crop from outside of Eretz Yisrael, we're not concerned anymore, and therefore the whole price was only prior to this din of Rebbe, prior to this allowance. Says the Gemara, so that was just the makar that we learned, that Bezdin has the power, number 1, to be mafkir properties, and number 2, even to the extent that you don't have to give Shumais and Maisers. Tani ein ma'avrin. So back in that price that we said you don't make a leap year in year 7 and 8. Amar Rav Mana hadad at Amar b'Rishayna sheyashanim ketikanam. In the beginning, when the years were in the right way, that's when we said that day that you should not make a leap year in year 7 and 8. Aval achshav, but nowadays sheyashanim ketikanam. As the Tikkun Chatin explains, why not? Because they're not in the proper times. Meaning, when the years are in the proper times, then the crops always ripen in Nisan. Like we know, it's the Chodesh Ha'aviv is the Chag Ha'aviv is what's coming up, and the reason is because all the crops ripen in the Nisan. But nowadays, when the years are off, and that's why we have to make leap years, then Yishvias Yishar Shnei Shvua. Another reason, says Ramana, that it's not a problem making a leap year in year 7. Says the Gemara Tani. We learned in the Mishnah, Shalbeis Rav Gamliel Levruah Maisai Shvius is a raya that they Lamaisa made a leap year miyad in the 8th year. So we see that this din of not making a leap year is not applicable anymore. Amar Rav Oven, says Rav Oven, in min hada, if what you're saying is true, les ad shma mina klum, we don't have a raya at all. Why do we not have a raya at all? Says the Gemara, because it says in the Torah, meaning, you here bring a raya from this din of making a leap year. The raya was to the concept that Bezdin has the power to completely make something ownership. But says Rav Oven, absolutely not, no raya, because it says in the Torah that we learn from the pasuk in the Torah that you have to make the months in the proper months. So the fact that you're allowed to yes or no make a leap year is not a din derabanan; it's based on a din deraisa. So it's not going to be a raya to have Bezdin Hefker because it has a precedent in the Torah. V'heidu Amar Da Gadish, says the Gemara. V'heidu Amar Da, and this is where This is another makar, and therefore we don't have a makar anymore. Because we see over here that, as the last tick in the line says, Defker Bezdin Potter Mi Meiser, meaning that's going to be the raya. What's the raya? It says in the Torah, Gadish. Again, the previous raya we just brought was not good. Why was it not good? Because it wasn't a raya that Bezdin has the power. Rather, we see that Shomer Esrish Chodesh Aviv that has a precedent in the Torah. So now we're looking for what's the makar. Says the Gemara. It says in the Torah, Gadish. Shalak Itachlav Kol Anagais Ba'aretz. If someone goes and there's all the leket, all the leftover stalks in the ground, and he takes his stack and he puts it on top of it, and now we don't know what is leket and what is not leket. It's all mixed up. So the din is, V'amar Rav Ami, as we turn over to Gimel and Beis, B'shem Rav Shimon Lakish to Beis Shammai, that this is going with Beis Shammai. We'll explain in one moment. Tika Beis Hillel, Ani and Eichlenu Maisran, from the Rav Yosi Shamanu, Shupatri Maisar Divrei Hakol Mishum Kanasa. So the raya from here was that we see that when you put your stack on top of the sheaves, it gets it all mixed up, and now the Nîm are going to lose. So Bez didn't have the power to go and say that no, all the crops on the bottom level, those are all go to the Nîm. So Bez didn't have the power to take away your items. But the Gemara then concludes it's only the Beis Shammai. But according to Beis Hillel, it's not true because it's going to be a knas, and therefore it's going to be a different lump. This is not working with Hefker, Bez din, Hefker. Says the Mishnah, Gimel and Beis, Halacha Gimel. Says the Mishnah, B'chamisha Asar Bai, on the 15th, Shulchanai Yoshim and Dina. They would set up money changer tables. Why would they set up money changer tables? Says the Tikkun Chadatin over here, the reason is so that they would have all the currencies. Everyone's coming to bring the Machzah Shekel, and people might be coming with a different coin from their own province, so that they would change the coin, so everyone would have the uniform currency. But Chafei on the 25th, Yoshim and Mikdash, they would sit in the base of Mikdash. Misha Yashu Mikdash, his Chilul Ashkan. They would begin on the 25th, right? We're getting close. The final date is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So 5 days before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they would sit and they would say, you didn't give your Machzah Shekel yet. His Chilul Mashkin, they would begin to force people by taking away their properties. As me mashkinan, who would they force? Levim v'Yisraelim geir v'avadim v'shechrarim avoloi, but they were not forced. Lashem avadim v'ktanim. We'll explain that in the Gemara. V'chol katan shetzich la'aviv lishkol yadai shov einoi paisik. But if a katan, his father, began giving for him, you have to always continue giving for him. And this is reminiscent of the din that we've spoken about by Purim time, by our din of Machzah Shekel, which is obviously patterned after the Machzah Shekel. The lacha is a father does not have to give for his child, but if a father one time give for his child without saying bli neder, then he has to always continue giving. Says the Mishnah, in memashkinin as a kohanim they darki shalom. We don't take a mashkin, we don't force the kohanim to give the Machzah Shekel because of keeping the peace. We'll see what that means. Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, hey ben Bukhri gave testimony biyavne kol koyin shashoikel inoi chayte. Any kohen that gives a Machzah Shekel, he's not a sinner. We'll explain this. Like you know, if you don't give, you're a sinner. I mean, you have to give. It's a chiyah for the kohanim to give. Said Yochanan Zaki, really, the kohanim have to give the Machzah Shekel. But they tried to say they don't have to give by learning the pasuk that said, and they would explain that said the kohanim, it says in the Torah that any mincha of the kohanim has to be completely burnt. And where did the Machzah Shekel go for all the tzibur, all the communal items? What were some of the communal items? The oimer and the shtei alechem. Says the kohanim, 1 second, if I go and I give my Machzah Shekel, you know what's going to happen? When they go and they bring the oimer, my Machzah Shekel is part of that oimer. And who eats the oimer? People eat it. But the din is that the mincha of a kohen, you're not allowed to eat it. It has to be burnt. So the kohanim tried to answer up why they didn't have to give and base it on this pasuk, but Rav Yochanan Zaki held it was a mistake, and really they have a yasachiv to give, which will explain in the Gemara exactly how this all plays out. Says the Gemara, in memashchen as a kohanim, we don't take a mashchin, we don't force the Kohanim to give. Says the Gemara, but we ask them to give. That's only at the point that they bring Shtei Cyrus, which we usually call them a gadol at that point. Then we don't even ask them. And we don't force them, even once they bring Beis Cyrus. Kini says the Gemara, that when it said in the Mishnah about Darkei Shalom, it didn't mean Darkei Shalom. It meant Darkei Kavod. In order to give Kavod to the Kohanim, we don't tell them, we don't force them to give the Machzah shekel. Just one word of the first piece of the Gemara that's said by the Ketanim, we don't force them. So the Tiklin Karatin here explains, it means from the age of 20 is when they have the Chiyuv. From the age of 13 to 20, that's the age of bringing Shtei Cyrus. That's the age that we ask them to give. So it comes out that under Shtei Cyrus, under 13, they're Pater. From 13 to 20, when they bring Shtei Cyrus, we ask them to give. But we don't force them. After 20, we force them. And now we just learned with regard to the Kehanim what it means when they Darkei Shalom. It meant when they Kavod. That with the Kohanim, we always have to give them kavod. It's a mitzvah deraisa to give a kohen kavod, and therefore that's why we don't force them to give the machzah shekel. Omer Rav Yehuda hate. So then we ended off the Mishnah with a machlekes between Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim, which really is a machlekes between Ben Bukhri and Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. Let's explain exactly what's going on over here. Omer Abrachia, time of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai said the Kohanim have to give the machzah shekel. Why? Zeh yitnu yudbei shvatim yitnu. Zeh gematria 5 and 7 is 12. All the Shvatim have to give. Interesting Makar, we learn from a Gematria that Kohanim have to give Machzah shekel. Rav Tavi b'shem Rav Anuda kin meshim Chacham Rav Yehuda. So they explain that the Chachamim, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, answered Rav Yehuda as follows: Chatas Yochid Mesav, Chatas Sibur Mesav. There's a difference between a Yochid and a Tzibur Chatos. And similarly, Minchas HaYochid Kreva Kalil, Ve'Minchas HaSibur Kreva Kalil. But there's also a difference between the Mincha of a Tzibur and a Yochid. A Yochid, a private carbon Mincha has to be eaten. Has to be burnt, but a Tzibur's Mincha does not have to be burnt. V'kasha Meshivin La'adam. And that's a question. You're asking a question, and Rav Yehuda, again, this was the Chachamim, Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, asking Rav Yehuda ben Bukhri. What's the question, says the Gemara. Titnan will explain more in a moment, but Rav Yehuda himself holds, She'ein Chatas Sibur Meisa, but Rav Yehuda Eimer Tamus. So how are you asking that the difference between Tzibur and Yachid? Rav Yehuda disagrees. But now the Gemara is going to actually explain, even though the Gemara just said it's not really a question of Yehuda, the Gemara is going to explain exactly what's going on over here, and this is what we're going to conclude the day with. And this is how he's going to answer. Zulay nidvas yachid. This is not an adava of a yachid. Meaning, we're basically the discussion here is as follows. The Kohanim, do they have to give a machzah shekel? Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Chachamim said yes, we learn from Zeh. Now we're trying to figure out, why is that true? What's the question? The question is, we know that a mincha of a kohen has to be burnt. However, a mincha of a Yisrael does not have to be burnt. So therefore what? The question is, if any time a kohen is going to have to give the machzah shekel, then when they bring a carbon mincha from the communal offering, there might be some coins in there from the Kohanim. And now we have an issue, because that carbon at one level, like the Shtei Alechem, has to be consumed. But the other level, it contains the mincha of the kohen. So how can you consume it? So that's what we're going on. So says the Gemara, the discussion here is Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai held no, but it's only by a yachid. Ve'enan ma'sivan lei, and they answered, Kivan shedem zulet sibar, kamishu nidva sibar, ksiv nidva sibar. It's as if it has the din of a public offering. Ksiv. It says in the Torah, now we're going to learn out the Makar for where this comes from. Therefore, Rav Yehuda, Rav Menachem Yechanam are called Avar Biyama Yitin. Whoever came over the Yamsov has to give, meaning even Kohanim. Whoever is counted, which does not include the Kohanim, Mandamar called over Biyama Yitain, Messiah Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, Mandamar called over Al B'Kdai Yitain, Messiah Ben Bukhri. So basically, what comes out is Ben Bukhri holds their potter, because it goes by how they were counted. Were the Kohanim counted? The answer is no. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai says they're chayiv. It goes for everyone who went to the Yamsuf. Did they go to the Yamsuf? And just to very quickly sum up the first point, which is a bit complicated. One more time. The Kohanim gave the machzah shekel or not? Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai said yes. Rav Yehuda ben Bukhri said no. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai said yes. Why? Because the other day have a chiyuv like we learned for the Torah. Rav Yehuda said no. Why did he say no? Because he said we're going to end up with an issue. Because if the Kohanim give a machzah shekel, shekel, then we have a problem because the kehanim, their truma, their mincha, it has to be burnt. But when you're going to bring the carbon, you have to eat it. So therefore, says Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, says Ben Bukhri, you are potter. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai retorted, then no. Once you have a real chiyuv, then it's going to be chayiv. You're asking me that every carbon mincha of a kohen has to be burnt? That's not true. That's only a mincha of a carbon of a kohen of a yachid. But when it's a tzibur, like the matzla shekel, like the shei alechem, it's brought for a tzibur, that does not have to be burnt. We'll pick up the next halacha.